Hey, it's David. In this video, I wanted to talk about prompt engineering and hopefully demystify the whole process. I think a lot of times it's made to sound more complicated than it really is, or it's explained in a way that it just goes in one ear and out the other. So I want to show you what it is and how to get the most out of your prompting. If you don't know what prompting is, it's essentially just the instructions that you type into the chat, like ChatGPT or Claude. An example would be, say you wanted to make an image and you wanted it to do a specific style of art. That would be something you would factor in when you wanted to phrase your prompt. I think that prompt engineering, like a lot of stuff, it's easier to do if you have a goal in mind. So rather than just sitting down and opening a web page or a book and reading about prompt engineering first and then trying to apply it, start with what you want to do and work from there. It will help you learn better if you use something hands-on. There are a few elements that make a good prompt, and depending on what you are going to ask, you'll use some of these more and some of these less. I want to note before we go into the examples that these are not the absolute best way to ask something, and I'm not saying you have to copy word for word what I'm saying. Just think about the concept behind each element and you'll get the idea. A good way to think about this too is you really just want to be more clear. You want to talk to the computer sort of like you are asking somebody for information. So you wouldn't walk up to somebody at a garden store and say, "Hey, tell me about plants," right? They'd look at you and say, "Well, which one?" But if you walked up to him and said, "Hey, I have an area of my house that is all shade. What should I plant there?" That makes more sense, right? And the AI is the same. You need to give it context, clarity, specificity. So I'll show you some examples here, both good and bad, that will give you a clearer idea of what I mean by each. So the first thing is clarity, ensuring your prompt is just clear and concise. Don't use any ambiguous language or anything that could lead to some confusion. Here's an example. This would be considered a bad prompt. As you can see, I don't really get much of anything, and it's more or less telling me that this is not a good prompt. Sometimes it'll spit out something like, "Plants are really cool, blah, blah, blah," but it's probably not what you wanted to ask. Now, an example of something more clear would be like that. You'll notice we get a much longer response. So this is just an example, and it's just used to illustrate what I mean by clarity. The next thing is being specific. This is similar to clarity. You want to make sure that you are asking for exactly the information that you want. An example of not a great prompt would be, "Tell me about exercise." And this is going to spit out something pretty generic that you probably already knew or could get really easily somewhere else. But if I want to be more specific, I'm going to ask something like this. So again, each of these elements of a good prompt have some overlap. So you might be thinking, this is pretty similar to the last example. And you're right, it is. It's just another example and another way to think of it. The next thing is context. This can really enhance the quality of the response you get. Context is just kind of giving it a frame of reference as to who is asking this question. So you're going to tell it why I'm asking this. Say I'm learning Python programming language, and I say, "Explain loops." This is going to tell me some stuff, and that might do it. This doesn't give the AI context into why I'm asking this. So this is an example of a better prompt in the framework of context. I'm telling it what I'm doing, what my level is, and what I need to know. So if the AI understands sort of where I'm coming from, it can craft a much better answer. The next element is not using open-ended questions. Open-ended questions usually lead to a less comprehensive answer. Here's an example of not a great prompt that's kind of open-ended, not really sure what they should answer. Like if somebody said to you, is meditation good? You could say, yeah, it's good, but you don't really know what they want to know. You don't really know what they're asking. You don't want to go on and on for 20 minutes about it when they're just trying to make small talk. So a better prompt would be, what are the benefits of meditation? Using our scenario, if you were at a party and you ask somebody this, okay, that gives them an end to the question. They just want to know what the benefits are. So they're not going to go off for 20 minutes about what meditation means to them or something. And again, you'll see the other elements that make a good prompt in all these examples I'm going through. So clarity, is meditation good? I mean, it's clear, but we could be more clear by being more specific. We could give this more context if we wanted, right? So, what are the benefits of meditation for an absolute beginner or for someone who is stressed? Each of these examples is not meant to string every element of a good prompt together. I'm just showing these to you in isolation so you know what key parts make up a good prompt. One quick side note again, there's not really something wrong you can do with a prompt, so don't worry about making a mistake or asking the wrong thing. You can always refine as you go. You might want to ask sort of an open-ended, not super clear, not giving a lot of context question. It could be like if you're brainstorming, or I might type in, what's a good hobby? And yes, I'm not being specific. I'm not giving it context, but maybe I don't want to. Maybe I just want it to spit out a big list of them and I can read that. And then as I see what the answers are, I can start being more specific, or I can say, okay, archery. What do I need to do to get started in archery? I've never done it before. Stuff like that. So it's not wrong to go against these best prompting practices. It really just depends on what your end goal is. There are a couple other concepts that I don't always use, but I'll mention them here because it will be important depending on what your question is or what you're working on. One of those ideas is engagement, and that's really just what I mentioned a second ago here. Asking the AI stuff as you go. You can engage the AI if you want to say stuff like, give me some more info on, or elaborate on this. Or you could even say, what do you think about it? Sometimes that is, again, really good for brainstorming. You're going to get answers that you wouldn't normally if you are trying to stick to this really focused, structured prompting script that you don't always want to. So again, these are not hard and fast rules. These are just ideas to help shape the output you are going to get from the AI. And one more thing I'll mention is formatting. This is just how you want the response given to you. Now, if you're working with, say, a spreadsheet that you upload and you say, I would like you to take this spreadsheet and give me the data from it. But maybe you don't want just the data. Maybe you want it in a list, or maybe you want it in a bullet point, or maybe you want certain things extracted and other things not. So again, that's just really more thinking of the end result. What do you want the AI to do? Ideal scenario, what will it do? It's not that it'll get it right on the first try, but it's a start and you can refine from there. But let's take this example and we'll just run through all the ideas here. So bake a cake. Okay, that's pretty generic, and I'd probably get some kind of cake here, but I'm not saying what kind of cake I want to make. So let's get a little more specific. How do I bake a chocolate cake? Gives me a recipe here. So that's a little bit more specific. Gives me chocolate frosting. Okay, this is good. So we went from just a cake to how do I bake a chocolate cake? That's a little bit clearer and more specific. We want to give it some context though. So maybe someone likes really rich chocolate cake. I'm making it for someone's birthday. So this is going to give some context. In this prompt, I gave it some context as to why I was baking the cake, who I was baking the cake for, and giving it a background. So running through from the beginning, we asked, how do I bake a cake? But we wanted to make that prompt more clear and more specific. So I said, how do we bake a chocolate cake? It gave me a better response, but I needed to give it some context. So then I said, oh, I am baking a cake for someone, and I remember they love German chocolate cake. So what is a good recipe, and how do I bake that? Now I want to engage the AI a little bit because maybe I want to ask, there might be some cakes that lend itself better or worse to that, depending on your taste preference. Maybe I want to engage and ask, this is engagement. We're just having a conversation. I'm asking for some more ideas of cakes that I could make. And of course, I could go more with these. Hummingbird cake, I've honestly never heard of that. So I could ask more about that. I could get different recipes and stuff. Now, let's say I wanted to format this a certain way. If you wanted a different format, or maybe you wanted to add an image of hummingbird cake to this, you could. Maybe you want it in a format you could copy and paste it to something or email. So that's kind of a nutshell guide to prompt engineering and how to get better responses out of the AI. This is really geared for beginners and someone who uses AI on a day-to-day basis for general things. Your use case might be slightly different, and if you're dealing with more complex information questions or you need something else, these ideas and concepts are still going to help with that, because if you're working in a specific, say, science or area like that, you'll know what you need to ask and you'll know what end goal you want. So I think that prompt engineering is often made more complicated than it needs to be. Not always, because there are some times that prompting can get really complex depending on what you're doing, if you're training an LLM or something like that. The other thing to keep in mind is that AI changes so fast, it's really hard to keep up with, and AI is improving at such a rate that what I tell you or anyone else tells you today might be outdated pretty soon. When ChatGPT first came on the scene, I think prompt engineering was maybe a little bit more important because people really didn't know how to interact with an AI, the mass majority of people who had never done it before. But as AI improves, it gets better and better at knowing what we're asking and what we want to ask and how we want it formatted. So as you're working with AI, think about these concepts. Don't worry about being exacting with your instructions. LLMs are getting better and better by the day at knowing what we're asking and getting more human-like in their thinking and reasoning. I don't think it's correct to worry about every little part of your prompt unless you're doing something that needs that, and you'll probably know if you do. If you're using a more advanced use case, you're probably already going to know a lot of this, but still, even in those cases, these are the basics that make up a good prompt. You always need to keep these things in mind. So I hope that helped demystify prompting a little bit. Don't worry about making a mistake. You really can't. You can always ask follow-up questions. Don't get tripped up just because it's an AI. Think of it like you're having a conversation with someone, and a lot of these things will just more or less fall into place. Think about how you would ask someone something and how you would frame it. And would they look at you like, you're crazy, or would they be able to give you a good answer? If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. See you next time.